Hey guys, welcome to our walkthrough of a penetration test on a specific vulnerability. And we're going to look at a SQL injection. I know it's not the fanciest vulnerability that exists, but I think it's pretty easy to understand and show, what we're actually looking for with penetration testing. And then I think you can go out and start applying what you learned here to different vulnerabilities. So last time we talked about penetration testing frameworks, including NIST, their special publication 800-115, and the OWASP penetration framework, where it's kind of geared more towards web applications, but we talked about ways to, really it's about segmentation of your testing. So whether you're in IoT or cloud security, I think you can apply the same concepts in terms of separating the different areas that you'll test in terms of what you're going to test and the components involved to really kind of bound what you're doing and make it more systematic and organized. And that's really what I was trying to get across there. So yeah, I think we can just kind of jump into it. Remember, SQL injection is a type of security vulnerability where an attacker is trying to insert malicious SQL queries into the input fields for execution by the backend or that SQL database. So trying to basically input this code that's not supposed to be there using a simple form field as an example. And it could lead to unauthorized access to database contents, maybe manipulation of the data, and a lot of other kind of malicious activities. And the first step is setting up the test. So we're going to identify potential SQL injection entry points, whether that's a form. We've seen in my walkthrough, especially with the OWASP juice stop, is where you're using this username password form and putting in inputs into the username field to get it to run code. And this could also apply to kind of any API endpoint that you might be targeting that really interacts with a SQL database. And we'll use tools like Sqlmap or burp sweep to automate some of these tests and manually inspect the results. It really speeds up and as well ensures you're kind of getting everything right. And then we get to the actual testing phase. So first we can look at error-based SQL injection. So we can inject a single quote into the data entry points and check for some SQL errors. And this indicates some vulnerable inputs. And remember from our previous example, this quote kind of terminates the string and allows for you to inject code. You're trying to see if this is actually susceptible to that type of attack and what kind of errors come out of it if you're trying to do that. And next, we can look at blind SQL injection tests using logical operations, where we're inputting conditions like 1 equals 1 or 1 equals 2 and check the application behavior, whether you get a true for 1 equals 1 or false or maybe some errors. But this is kind of a way to really identify potential injection points without requiring this explicit error message. And then additionally, we'll use Sqlmap to automatically scan all forms, as I mentioned before. In our analysis phase, we've identified several vulnerable parameters susceptible to SQL injection. And to remediate these vulnerabilities, we recommend input validation checks, adopting prepared statements with parameterized queries in the application's code. And then, of course, as with anything, you want to have regular code reviews and security testing to see if any updates have changed this vulnerability in terms of whether you are now vulnerable to it as opposed before. And you really need to integrate that into the software development lifecycle, which we'll get into later in the course where we're going to talk about DevSecOps and how we can automate some of these within our pipeline. And this allows you to continually assess and improve the security of your application as you go forward. So we covered basically an example intro to SQL injection of kind of what you would do and walk through the various steps. including checking errors, blind injections. But now we're actually going to get into the tools that we would use that I mentioned in this example, including OWASP ZAP to capture HTTP request data sent during a login attempt, and then Sqlmap to perform the actual SQL injection. And yeah, looking forward to it. And hopefully, it gives you some experience with both of those very useful tools. Last time we covered the pen testing steps for input validation on a specific vulnerability SQL injection. And I know it's a pretty basic one, but I think it's useful to walk through with the tools. I don't want to get too bogged down in the specifics about a single vulnerability, but I highly recommend using these tools, going through that top 10 OWASP vulnerability list, and really showing how these different schools can be a part of that process. And so this video is going to be getting into how we actually use the tools that I mentioned in the last video, specifically OWASP ZAP and Sqlmap. And we're going to try and capture login attempt data and use that to perform a SQL injection attack. And starting with ZAP, we're going to walk through how we actually set up a proxy server through ZAP so we can monitor the traffic, and it's very useful for capturing data requests as well as responses through a server. And so in this case, we're going to look at a login attempt and what kind of data can we capture, and then how do we actually use that. First, you can go to zapproxy.org, and now it's only 1P, and /download, and download whatever works for your system. And then you can go to the GitHub page for Sqlmap. And I generally like to clone the repo, but up to you. Here's the GitHub page. There's a README throughout the there to install, and then the actual commands to do it. So it's pretty straightforward. So I don't really need to cover it here, but you will kind of face things that you need to install, like the Java runtime environment 11, making sure you have all the right things up to date. But I'll leave that for you to figure out. And now one thing I do recommend using Firefox. Just when we're using it as a proxy server, I found it's less error prone for that kind of thing. And once you are in Firefox, you can go over here on the right, go to settings, go all the way to the bottom, go to network settings. And then this is where you can select manual proxy configuration, and you want to go localhost for both HTTP and HTTPS, and then use the port 8080 for both of them. And then that'll basically tell the browser to run through your ZAP proxy server. All right, so I'm running OWASP Juice Shop locally on my host machine. And it's better to do that if you're going to try and scan any web applications. So I'm just going to basically go to my command prompt to start it up, go into the right directory, and then npm start, that starts it up. Okay, and now it's listening on port 3000, and we can test that out if we just go to our browser and type it in just to see if it works. And great, we can access it. So we can close that, and now go back to our ZAP. And generally for this, you don't need to persist the session, but you can if you want to. So I'm just going to go start here. And it's pretty easy to start, actually. There's automated scan. We're not going to do that because that's a kind of a full scan, and it'll create a lot of noise. What I like to do, initially at least, is to do manual explore, because you can kind of have in mind a specific vulnerability that you want to test and the data that you actually want to capture. So just by starting this, it's already started the proxy server, and your Firefox is going to go through that. So we can click manual explore, type in localhost port 3000. And this HUD is kind of this overlay of your display in your browser. It's pretty cool, and I highly recommend going through the tutorial on that to see what you can do. But I'll launch the browser, which pulls this up. This is that HUD I mentioned, and this is how you take the tutorial, but I'm just going to continue to the target. And great, we can dismiss here. So I've gone to the kind of opening page. We can go back to our ZAP session and look at the history. So you can see, it started to capture lots of messages back and forth. Most of them most of them are actually keep alive messages. But now we can go back to our browser and start to go through it. So we can go to the login page, and I'll type hi and bye as the password and attempt to log in. Great, I couldn't get in, but because we're going through ZAP, it was able to capture that message, and we can see that if we go back through ZAP. Get to the bottom here. I know it's maybe difficult to see, but you can kind of see this REST user, who am I? Double click it. This is kind of the starting of your login, and then this is the key one right here, that post message. That's going to contain basically the message that was sent, right? So this is your header, and then in here is the text, right? So it was email, hi, password, bye. So we're actually able to intercept that message, look at the structure, and then we can use that information with Sqlmap to basically try and exploit it. All right, so that wraps up the video using ZAP. I broke it up into 2 videos, so it's not too long. So great, we have the actual payload that's being sent to the back end for a login attempt, and then we can use that data and format with Sqlmap to start testing for SQL injection attacks, which we'll cover in the next video. All right, see you next time. Hey guys, so last time we used ZAP to get the actual login attempt data through that HTTP request, and we can now use the Sqlmap software to attempt to inject certain types of SQL injection attacks into that payload and see what we can get from it. So now we can go into our terminal window and start running Sqlmap. And it's important to check if everything's working correctly, so you can run Python sqlmap.py-h, and that basically just shows you the basic functions, runs it, and checks if everything's working. And also make sure that you're running your Juice Shop instance because you will be scanning it. So and it might also be worthwhile to go to the homepage of Juice Shop if you've been playing with it to reset all of your progress. I had some issues because it kind of records your progress and attacks you've done to it, and so it might actually cause problems. So I recommend just going to the homepage and you'll see it pop up the option to delete your progress. So now basically it's pretty easy to run. You just got to make sure that you get into your Sqlmap folder that you used to download the Sqlmap. And because I've been running it, I ran a purge, which basically deletes all the data. The great thing about it, it actually stores your previous scans, and so it can use less resources if you want to maybe change it slightly or whatever, and kind of expand and maybe do other types of attacks while still remembering that it's actually running a SQL database, things like that. That's basically why I did this. So now what we can do is just run this command right here. Okay, and the -u here basically allows us to select a target that we're going to do, and our target is obviously the login page. So you can get quite versatile here. There's also other options to put right here for different types for how you're handling the data that you're going to be using. And I'm going to provide a cheat sheet that basically, outlines all of these different options. And then you can, Google yourself, look at different types of attacks, what kind of commands you can use, and really get an idea of how to use it. The data part right here, that's where we're actually going to input our test data. So from ZAP, we were able to understand what kind of parameters it's expecting, the format, so now Sqlmap can use this to start injecting attacks when it submits requests to that login page. And so for here, I just put basically a test email, and then password is test. Now, another port, you don't have to do this, but basically this 401 code is going to pop up because it's going to fail to authenticate to the login, right? Like there's no in the user table, there's no username and password that matches this, so it's going to fail and pop up. So we can ignore it. You don't have to. If you want to see what it looks like, go ahead. And then you want to basically specify the types of attacks that you're going to do. So the level and risk basically tells Sqlmap like how detailed is this attack. You can go from basic to quite advanced, and it kind of determines the types of payloads that it sends, the multiple of types of payloads that it's going to try, and then also different techniques. So I've set the max here to just really be thorough. But if you want to reduce your scope and resources, then you can lower this. And then this last piece, the batch, is basically saying I want to automate it. Sqlmap's going to ask you some questions if you want to, it detected this. Do you want to continue, testing it, or just assume that the rest is going to be, let's say, a SQL database. I don't want to test other types of SQL databases or other types of databases throughout the attack. So let's just stick with SQL. And you'll see it in the data. And so, yeah, I think we should dive in. I've already run my scan. I have the Juice Shop instance running, and it performed all of this, and it's basically going to report as it goes through the scan. And the different types of tests that it's doing. Now, it is important to kind of walk through each thing. There's a lot of data here, and I recommend running different types of tests. Maybe there's other test websites that you can use to basically get an idea of the types of results that you might see. But if you see here. Here it asks you a question. So, okay, great. It found that it's running SQLite database. Do you want to skip the test payload specific for other databases? And if I didn't do batch, I would have to enter in Y to continue it. But since I've selected batch, it's just going to automatically fill in a Y there. And then start running through different types of SQL injections. Okay, it's going to basically use the data you provided and inject certain types of attacks that could go along with it. And we're seeing here that it's testing blind types of attacks, blind SQL injection. And then you get to the bottom, to the important piece, where it actually finds a SQL injection. Now, it's testing two types of blind attacks. So basically, a blind attack is when you are submitting queries, but you don't get the direct response back. You're trying to use it to kind of infer information about the type of attack, and so you can kind of use that to help you craft your type of attack. And so here, the first one is the Boolean base, and so it's basically testing that. If you remember the 1 = 1 case, are you allowed to input that into the fields and get a true response? Here it's using 2565, but basically it's saying that this does indeed work. So the types of attacks that we've done in the past, we use the apostrophe or 1 = 1, and then -- to basically comment the password piece out. that type of attack is going to work, which we already know it does. But this is a way to, scan and show you that it actually does. And you can also look in, it says not here, so don't be confused by that. There's something you can search that basically walks into, it's within the code of Sqlmap that why not comes up. But so your attack would be or and then this equals. You're not going to include the or, and that's because of the way it's coded. So recommend looking into it. It's a pretty complicated reasoning, so I'll leave it as an exercise to go investigate. And then the final one is a time-based blind attack. And this one basically submits a really heavy query. And if it comes back quickly with like an error, then this type of injection doesn't work. But if it's actually processing the query, then you know you've actually injected something into that query. And so it's a way to kind of tell you, what types of injection attacks will actually work, or if the backend has designed some sort of protection against that specific attack that you'll get error. So this is telling you that time-based is possible, so you can start running through the different types. Now, basically, sometimes this might not be possible, or sometimes this might not be possible. So it's this tool is really about giving you kind of information to help you craft your type of attack. And as a pen tester, it's also important that okay, these are vulnerabilities, so we really have to run through the series of attacks that's possible here and make sure that we protect against these. Hopefully you found this useful to kind of get you started with some of these tools and really gave you some, hands-on experience with the specific vulnerability and what it looks like. I think these are really great tools to have in your tool shed to, test types of attacks, but also give information about your system, whether you're using ZAP as a proxy to see kind of what payloads are passing through, or Sqlmap to really get down to the nitty-gritty of SQL injection attacks. And I recommend, going through other tutorials. This doesn't give you enough information to really master the tool, but hopefully it gets you started, and then just start trying all of the tutorials online. It's quite fun. I hope it gets you excited about the capabilities of these tools. And next, we're actually going to get into an extremely useful tool, Kali Linux, which basically is this whole suite of tools. It's this pen testing environment that I think every pen tester should use and extensively. So I'll show you how to set it up and walk through some examples. Welcome to our video on diving into Kali Linux, which is a super powerful tool used by a lot of security professionals. Last time we talked about how we can actually use tools like ZAP and Sqlmap to perform a successful SQL injection attack with a real vulnerability using OWASP ZAP. And then hopefully that gave you an idea of what it looks like to do penetration testing for input validation. And by this point, I'm hoping that you explored some other vulnerabilities using some of these tools as well to really give you an idea of how powerful they can be. But in this video, we're going to cover what Kali Linux actually is and why it's favored by a lot of security professionals, and then give you a hands-on experience for using some of the tools within it, specifically Nmap and Metasploit, which are great tools that you almost use all the time. So let's get into it. Kali Linux is a Debian-based Linux distribution aimed at advanced penetration testing and security auditing. It comes with hundreds of tools, which really makes it so amazing to use. It's kind of this one-stop shop, and it's geared towards various cybersecurity tasks like, as I mentioned, penetration testing, but also security research, computer forensics, even reverse engineering. And that's why it's really one of the best tools due to this robust tool set, as well as its ease of use and active community support, which is really great. You find a lot of tutorials on it, how to use it. There's a lot of people using it, and helping out with with new security professionals and existing security professionals. So it really supports a wide range of users, and that's why I love it. And so here's an installation guide for installing Kali Linux on VirtualBox. It gives you all the right settings and configurations, and it's very detailed with all the right screenshots. So navigate to here. And then here is where you can also get the actual ISO image for your platform, which it outlines in that guide. And so now you should have that. We can get into Kali Linux and start using Nmap. And I'm showing this tool because I think it's usually a great place to start when you're starting to do penetration testing and just kind of get an idea of your network architecture. So we can open the terminal and type Nmap, followed by different functions. I'm not going to go actually run the scan here because it's on my home network. So I'll pull up some results that I have faked for this course over here on the left in the notepad. But yeah, let's assume I ran it, and let's start by examining the initial sweep with the -SN flag, which is a basic ping scan for host discovery, scanning the subnet of this IP address. And we can see we have identified multiple hosts, indicating that these devices are active on your network and that they're accessible. Next, we can actually conduct a more detailed scan on the first IP address and see what kind of ports are available. So using the -P 1-65535 range, which scans all possible ports, this scan revealed several open ports, including standard ones like the 135 for Microsoft's RPC service, 139 and 445 for Windows sharing services, and other ports such as 3000, which you remember that's our Juice Shop instance. And then of course, in the past we've used Nessus, so this 8834 is for that scanner if you remember entering that in. And these open ports can expose your network to vulnerabilities if they're not properly secured. So services like the MSRPC and NetBIOS often targeted in network attacks due to their role in remote management and file sharing. And additionally, ports like 3000 running web apps such as Juice Shop, which can also be risky if exposed on a production network without adequate security controls, can be actual entry points for web-based attacks. So if we want to move deeper, we can use the -SV option, which is used to identify service versions on the same IP, which obviously revealed services like Microsoft Windows for RPC and the NetBIOS -SSN. But for port 3000, it actually gave some details on the service, indicating it was an HTTP service, detailed headers, as well as the HTML content. That points to, we can actually see here the OWASP Juice Shop in just by reading that copy right there. So this was a basic scan. I highly recommend going inside your own network. Remember, you have to use it on networks that you have permission for, and just getting an idea of what information you can gather about the various hosts on your network, and then use that for creating this kind of mental map of this network. And that's kind of this first step before you get into, let's say, Nessus for vulnerability scanning, right? You're going to start scanning all of these different entry points that you see for specific vulnerabilities, get more information, and go from there. And that's it for this video on using Nmap to try and scan your different network instances, try and create this network map of everything that's on your network, and then kind of use that for different scanning mechanisms. But we're still going to continue with Kali Linux. So the next video will be about using Metasploit, which is a really great tool for developing and actually executing some exploits. And so we'll show you how to use that in the next video. Hello, and welcome to our part 2 of Kali Linux walkthrough, where we're going to focus on Metasploit to actually exploit some real vulnerabilities. So last time we learned how to map out a network using Nmap, for host discovery, and then we also did some port scanning to see what ports are open, and then talked a little bit about some of the vulnerabilities there. Now, but before we get into Kali Linux again, I want to walk through some potential practice targets to use safely for penetration testing with Metasploit. And so we can effectively use Metasploit without any legal consequences. First, we have Metasploitable, which we've already seen before, which is a virtual machine created by the Metasploit team. And it's packed with intentional vulnerabilities, perfect for to be able to start understanding the exploitation process in a risk-free environment. And we already used Nessus to perform a scan, and you saw how you can do unauthenticated scans and authenticated scans, and you get kind of different vulnerabilities with that. And there's also VulnHub, which offers a variety of VMs that you can download and use to practice real-world scenarios, and then varying degrees of difficulty. For web application security, OWASP is always kind of the place to go, and they have a broken web application program which includes a VM with numerous vulnerable web apps. Hack the Box is also an excellent platform for those looking for a more dynamic challenge. And then lastly, Try Hack Me is kind of a more structured learning approach and it provides some challenges. But we're going to use Metasploitable as our target. We've already set it up in previous exercises, so we're going to kind of dive in. So I've opened my copy of Kali Linux, and we can immediately just go to the terminal. And now Metasploit actually uses a PostgreSQL as its database, so we need to make sure it's actually running, so it won't work. And if you follow some other tutorials online, they often forget that piece. So what we can do is enter service PostgreSQL start, and it's going to ask me to log in. Great, now we can test if it's actually working using netstat-atnp grep, and it should be running on port 5432. Great, and you can basically see that it is open. And for this walkthrough, we're going to try and use a backdoor to Metasploitable, and it's called the VSFTP version 2.3.4, and that's basically a compromised source package that placed a backdoor, and then if you installed that in your system, it basically allows you to open this port 6200 and give you access to the system using the shell. So we can go ahead and run the Metasploitable console. It'll just take a little bit. Great, okay. Now we're going to basically just try and search for that specific vulnerability. So VSFTP. Okay, came up. There's two here. We're going to choose the one that actually has the backdoor, and this one, the rank is excellent. And then we're just going to use that. And just to save time, I have it already prepared. So use exploit Unix FTP. FSFTP, and then that basically that exploit. So then we can press enter, and you can see now that it's actually using that exploit. And we can go options, and this kind of tells you, how to use it. So we can see our hosts there, or roasts. That's how you specify the target that you want to use it in. So we can go set roasts, and then use your IP address of your Metasploitable VM. Okay, great. And now you can actually just say exploit. Now, if successful, we'll be in the shell. And so, it doesn't really say that it is, but we can type something like ID. Okay, great. We actually have access to the shell. And one thing we can do, as an example of, let's say, lateral movement within the network, is we can try and find some files or any data that I can use to maybe help give me access to other things, right? And so Metasploitable comes with a file system that, a file that we can just open up. ECT shadow. And what we have here is basically all of the username and passwords for different pieces in the system, and we even see the MSF admin here, and this contains the hash of the password. So what we can actually do is take that hash, go into your applications, and start looking at password attacks. And a good one to use is John the Ripper right here. And you can basically guess the password. And then you can take that and then try and, pass the same account through other pieces of a system or organization and gain access to other stuff. So that's part of the lateral movement and the post exploitation phase of what information can you get and how can you use it for other systems, and that's really where you really embed yourself into a system and figure out. And it is important to try and take it as far as you can. So let's say, okay, there's this vulnerability. What can I do with it? It's like, okay, well, I was able to get this data. What can I do with that data? And so kind of map out every single option. And so it can be, pretty time consuming, but it really should give you an idea of what this platform can actually be used for, and then kind of use these various tools all together. Look at some other tutorials for specific vulnerabilities. There's a lot of them with Metasploit, as we saw with our Nessus scan. And yeah, so hopefully that was an introduction to Kali Linux, and as well as Metasploit, which is a really great tool for using a lot of these common exploits for known vulnerabilities. And then yeah, try and play around with Metasploitable VM, and there's also other things that you can find online that I mentioned previously. So that's it for now, and then I think we're going to see how can we take that and produce real documentation for properly conveying your findings, and how to report it in a clear, concise manner. Hopefully you enjoyed the walkthrough of Kali Linux and then some other tools like Zap and Sqlmap. I hope that it, gave you a feel for how you can use some of these tools, and I recommend, going nuts with using them, running through tutorials. It's the only way to really, experience this, and I'll, make some suggestions in the projects with the end of the section. But now I think it comes down to, okay, great, we did our pen testing, we did our scans. How do we actually take that and go through the actual stage of reporting it, right? And this is a very important piece. And we're going to document your findings, remediation steps, and a step-by-step process for how these vulnerabilities are actually exploited. So this is where you actually get down to describing to a wide range of audience, like how to actually exploit this vulnerability, what does it mean for the business, things like that. So, accurate reporting not only supports the integrity of the testing process, but also ensures actionable insights, right? If everybody can understand what that means, then they can all get on board and start to fix them as soon as possible. So it's about improving your security as well, making sure that you're conveying information in a clear, concise manner. So let's dive into how to document these findings, write effective reports, and then I'm going to include a real-world example of a report template that I think is great and you can use. So when documenting findings, precision is key. Each finding should include a clear description, what the vulnerability is, and the test that you actually did for that vulnerability. So what tool did you use? What are the results? And then it's very important to include a proof of concept or evidence of that. Actually proving that this vulnerability can be exploited, whether it's showing code, the tool test results, screenshots, whatever gets your point across that this isn't a vulnerability and this is the proof. And it's important in understanding that, getting that urgency across, right? Um, then once you've outlined that, you can get into steps for actually replicating the issue, right? And this is going to be necessary for dev teams where they want to understand how their code actually created this vulnerability, so they're going to have to replicate it to best issue that fix. And so really this whole thing is basically a detailed guide on how to actually exploit these vulnerabilities. And a big part of that too you need to include in the course is the risk assessment. So critical, medium, high, really incorporating all of those factors we've talked about up to this point to create this prioritized list. And remember, clarity and consistency significantly impacts the remediation process. How effective can you translate the finding of the vulnerability, the remediation process, and actually fixing it and issuing that patch if that is the thing that fixes it. So writing an effective report involves more than just listing the findings. It requires them presenting in a structured and detailed manner that's understandable to all stakeholders. And to start, you need to start with this executive summary, followed by detailed technical findings and conclude with remediation. So it's crucial to tailor the language and the details according to the audience to ensure that the report is both actionable and comprehensible. And the technical section is composed of a methodology section where you're going to be detailing the test environment and the techniques used to create these exploits for those vulnerabilities. And then you're going to get into the finding section where you list all the vulnerabilities categorized and detailed, and you're going to really leverage your vulnerability assessment report for this, and then adding in any changes that to the prioritization that might have changed based on the penetration test, right? Because you're going to be actually understanding how this vulnerability exploits your system, and you might find that it gets access to data that you really didn't think possible for this vulnerability, so that might upgrade it from low to critical. And then of course, if you have any other additional information that's maybe not as important, you can include in the appendix things like definitions, maybe additional screenshots for anyone wishing to go deeper on something in the document. And actually, I found this great example of a pen test report from Pen Test Hub, and I think it could be used as your template for your findings. And as we walk through this example, we're going to try and focus on the key components that make it both informative as well as actionable. So first, the executive summary, briefly summarizes the scope of the test, key vulnerabilities found, and the potential impact to the business. It's designed to give stakeholders a quick overview that of your test without the technical details. And so really, this is what's going to get you that management buy-in up front. Something quick and easy for everybody to read, and then the technical details are for kind of if you want to expand maybe something specific in the executive summary, or your actual technical team is going to actually read the rest. And then we're actually going to get into the methodology section where we're going to be a lot more technical about how we describe things. And we're going to really go, one by one in terms of the findings. So, this one starts with user impersonation, improper access control. That's pretty important. Kind of brief explanation for how they found it, what's actually happening, vulnerability details, and here they can actually reference a specific uh, MITRE vulnerability, and then the evidence, as I mentioned, that proof of concept where we're actually showing messages here. Now, of course, they've blacked it out because it gives sensitive information, but you can kind of figure out what's in there, and then basically what actually makes a successful attack and the remediation guidance. Now, I think you could include a little bit more detail here, but I think they've left that for the appendix. But this is enough to do the job. And then, oh yeah, I skipped attack vectors over here in terms of how they actually inject and create that attack. Data exfiltration, again, it's kind of more focused on improper access control, and these ones are pretty critical. Privilege escalation is kind of the same idea, but now you're kind of escalating maybe existing privileges to be able to do some admin functions, which can be important. And so here's like our engineers have discovered that by altering these values, you can lead to privilege escalation. And then here's the examples and then the guidelines again. So you can kind of get the idea of what's to be included in here. And I would even suggest more detail than this, but it's a pretty simple example that gets the idea across. Here's some cross-site request forgery. And then finally, after you go far enough down, you get to the appendices, which is, this is where it's like, what kind of methodology do we use? And they're talking about OWASP top 10 web application risks, and obviously we've covered injection in this course, and the other 9 that are important. So they've kind of from the start said this is the the guidelines that we abided by. This is our infrastructure for how we actually set up the assessment, including some tools that they used. This is how they assess the mobile application. So obviously it's a mobile application that they're testing, and then that's it. So hopefully that gave you enough information. As with any security job, documentation is one of the most important thing, and you have to do it right, or it's easy to miss stuff. You're not going to get the resources that you want, as I mentioned too many times probably.